Welcome back, everybody, for another deep dive. And today we're going to be looking at Madhushala
Oh, yeah.
by Harivansh Rai Bachchan.
That's a good one.
Madhushala is Hindi for House of Wine. So we're going to be talking about a collection of poems all centered around a tavern.
Yeah. It's a really interesting collection because it's not really about drinking.
Yeah.
It's more of like a metaphor for life and all the experiences that come with it.
Yeah, and I thought it was really interesting that right off the bat, we're welcomed into this tavern. Anybody is welcome here. There's this one line that says, first, you'll be welcomed with a tilak, then prasad will be offered. But before all else, your welcome is most important, which I just thought was a really interesting way to start a collection of poems about a tavern.
It really sets the tone, right?
Yep.
Like he's creating a space that's open and inclusive to everyone.
Right.
Doesn't matter who you are, where you come from, you're welcome in Madhushala.
Yeah, and I thought it was interesting how it went on to say that, it's not like you're going to go there and, get a drink and then leave. It's more like, you're welcome to stay here.
Yeah.
And, this is a place for you to, relax and let go of all your worries.
It's a refuge, a place where you can forget about the world outside and just be present in the moment.
So have you ever been to a place, listener, that, makes you feel like that? Where you can just kind of, let go of everything?
I think we all need spaces like that, places where we can just be ourselves and not have to worry about the pressures of daily life.
Yeah, and it almost makes me think about the tavern as, a character in itself,
Oh, absolutely. Madhushala is more than just a setting. It's like a living, breathing entity. It has its own personality, its own rhythm.
Yeah.
It's almost like another character in the poems.
Yeah, and we can't talk about Madhushala without talking about wine.
Right. The wine is like this central metaphor. It's not just about getting drunk. It's about experiencing life in all its flavors.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting how Bachchan equates wine to all these different things like love and pain and knowledge and even spirituality.
It's like he's saying that all these things are intertwined. They're all part of what makes life rich and meaningful.
And have you ever noticed, listener, how sometimes when something really good happens in your life, you kind of want to celebrate with a drink?
Yeah, or when something bad happens, you might want to drown your sorrows. Bachchan's point is that both joy and sorrow are part of life. You can't have one without the other.
Yeah, it's like that old saying, you can't have the sweet without the sour.
Exactly.
Okay.
And it's in those moments of both joy and sorrow that we truly experience what it means to be alive.
And I think what's really cool about Madhushala is how Bachchan uses all this really vivid imagery to
Oh, yeah.
bring this tavern to life. You can almost hear the clinking of glasses and smell the aroma of the wine and feel the energy of the people in there.
He's a master of imagery. You can practically taste the wine on your lips and feel the warmth of the tavern around you.
And
He creates a whole sensory experience with his words.
yeah, and it's not just all fun and games in Madhushala.
Right. He also uses this setting to address some pretty serious social issues.
Yeah, he doesn't shy away from social commentary at all.
No, he's very outspoken about the injustices he sees in society. Remember, he was writing during a time of great upheaval in India. So his poems reflect the struggles and aspirations of that era.
Yeah, he tackles things like hypocrisy and challenges social norms and advocates for equality. He even criticizes the caste system, which was a deeply ingrained part of Indian society at the time.
It was very controversial.
Yeah.
But he didn't back down.
Yeah.
He used Madhushala as a platform to speak truth to power.
And I think what's really interesting is how he uses this seemingly lighthearted setting, like a tavern, to address these really heavy issues.
It's a brilliant strategy. He takes a space that's associated with leisure and pleasure and turns it into a space for social commentary.
Yeah, and it makes me wonder if we have spaces like that today.
Yeah, where people can come together from all walks of life and engage in these kinds of discussions.
Yeah, is there a modern day Madhushala where we can talk about important social issues, but in a way that's not
Yeah, in a way that's accessible and engaging, not preachy or academic.
Yeah, because I think sometimes when we talk about these really serious issues, it can be hard to find a common ground.
Right, it can feel very divisive. But Madhushala creates a space where people can come together and have these conversations in a way that's both meaningful and enjoyable.
And that's what I think is so brilliant about it.
It's a reminder that we don't always have to be so serious.
Yeah.
We can have fun and engage in thoughtful discussions at the same time.
Yeah, and it makes you wonder, what would it take to create a Madhushala in the real world?
That's a good question.
Like a space where everyone truly feels welcome and equal.
Maybe that's the challenge Bachchan is posing to us.
Yeah.
He's not giving us all the answers, but he's encouraging us to think about how we can create a more just and inclusive society.
And you know what's crazy? All of this is just scratching the surface of Madhushala.
Oh, yeah.
There's so much more to unpack here.
We haven't even touched on the spiritual themes yet.
Yeah, and that's what we're going to be getting into next time.
Stay tuned.
Yeah, I see you then.
See ya. And, amidst all this talk about, welcoming people and joy and all that, there's this other kind of, undercurrent in Madhushala that I find really fascinating, and it's this idea of death.
Yeah, I was actually really struck by that too.
Yeah, it's almost like he's saying, life is short, so enjoy it while you can.
Yeah, there's this one verse where he says, "The fire of life is burning low. The cup is about to slip from my grasp. Drink and be merry, my friends, for tomorrow we may not be here." And that just really hit me hard.
It's a powerful reminder that our time here is limited. We should make the most of every moment.
Yeah, I mean, it definitely makes you think about what are you doing with your life? And are you spending your time doing things that you enjoy? Are you surrounded by people that you love?
Exactly. What's the point of it all if you're not savoring every drop?
And I think it's interesting how he juxtaposes that with the whole tavern setting,
Yeah, it's not what you typically associate with thoughts about mortality.
Yeah.
But it actually works really well. Like he's saying, even in a place where people come to forget their troubles, death is still a reality.
Yeah, and it's almost like he's using the tavern as a way to confront that reality,
Like a safe space to explore those big questions about life and death.
And I think it's important to note that Bachchan isn't saying that we should just party all the time and ignore the fact that we're going to die.
Right. He's not promoting recklessness.
Yeah.
He's more about being present and appreciating the time that we have.
Yeah, it's more about mindful living, being aware of your own mortality, but not letting it paralyze you.
Exactly. Yeah, life is finite, but that doesn't mean we can't enjoy it.
Yeah. And I think another thing that's really cool about Madhushala is how Bachchan uses it to comment on social issues.
Oh, yeah. Especially those related to caste and religion.
Yeah, he wasn't afraid to challenge the status quo, you know.
He was very outspoken about the injustices he saw in society.
Yeah, and it was pretty radical for his time to be talking about these things.
Especially in the way he did. He used humor and satire to point out the hypocrisy of the caste system and the religious elite.
Yeah, and he didn't just point fingers, He also offered a vision for a better world. Like a world where everyone is treated equally regardless of their caste or religion.
Yeah, and I think that's what makes Madhushala so powerful. It's not just about criticizing the way things are, it's about imagining a better future.
And inspiring people to work towards that future. Yeah, and I think that's something that we can all learn from.
Absolutely. We should never be afraid to speak out against injustice and to fight for a more just and equitable world.
And I think it's interesting how Bachchan uses this, the tavern setting to kind of create this utopian vision,
Yeah, Madhushala becomes this idealized space where social barriers don't exist.
Yeah, everyone's welcome there and everyone's treated with respect.
And it's interesting to think about whether that kind of utopia is actually possible in the real world.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely a challenge, but I think it's a challenge worth striving for.
I agree. We should never give up on the dream of creating a more just and equitable society.
And I think one of the things that makes Madhushala so appealing is that it's not overly preachy or anything.
Right. It's more about inviting people to think for themselves.
Yeah, it's he's saying, hey, here's some food for thought, What do you make of it?
And that's what makes it so engaging. It's not a lecture. It's a conversation.
Yeah, and it's a conversation that I think is still relevant today.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
The themes that he explores are timeless,
Yeah, we're still grappling with issues of social justice and inequality and the meaning of life and all that stuff.
And Madhushala offers us a way to engage with those issues in a way that's both thought-provoking and enjoyable.
Yeah, and I think that's what makes it such a great work of art.
It's both entertaining and insightful.
Yeah, and it leaves you with a lot to think about long after you've finished reading it.
And that's the mark of a truly great piece of literature.
Okay, so we've talked about the social commentary and the whole death thing, but there's another really important aspect of Madhushala that we need to talk about.
Right, the spiritual dimension.
Yeah, and I think this is where things get Really interesting.
Because it might seem counterintuitive to think of a tavern as a space for spiritual exploration.
Yeah, especially in like, Western culture where we tend to associate taverns with like, drinking and partying and stuff.
But in Madhushala, the tavern becomes this like sacred space.
Yeah, it's almost like a temple.
Mm-hmm. And the wine becomes like this divine offering.
Yeah, and the act of drinking becomes like a form of worship.
It's like Bachchan is saying that spirituality isn't confined to like, temples or churches or mosques.
Yeah.
It can be found anywhere, even in the most unexpected places.
And I think that's a really beautiful idea, Like, it's not about like, following a set of rules or rituals. It's more about like finding that connection with something bigger than yourself.
And that connection can happen anywhere.
Yeah. And I think that's something that we can all relate to, Like, we've all had those moments where we feel like we're connected to something greater than ourselves.
Whether it's through nature or art or music or even just like a really good conversation.
Yeah. And I think Madhushala is like a reminder that those moments are sacred.
And that we should cherish them.
And one thing that I found really fascinating about the spiritual aspect of Madhushala is this figure of the sake.
Oh, yeah. The wine server.
Yeah. And it's interesting how Bachchan kind of elevates the sake to like this almost like spiritual guide.
Like a guru or a mentor.
Yeah, it's like the sake isn't just pouring wine.
Right?
They're pouring wisdom.
They're helping the patrons to see the world in a new way.
And I think that's a really cool idea. Like who would have thought that a bartender could be a spiritual guide?
It's a reminder that wisdom can come from the most unexpected sources.
Yeah, and that we should be open to learning from anyone and everyone.
Regardless of their social status or profession.
And I think it's also interesting how the sake is often portrayed as like this kind of like mischievous figure,
Like a trickster.
Yeah, like they're not afraid to like, challenge the patrons and push their buttons.
And that's part of their role as a spiritual guide,
Yeah.
To make us question our assumptions and to help us to see things from a different perspective.
And I think that's something that we can all benefit from, Like, we all need someone in our lives who's going to, like, call us out on our bullshit and help us to grow.
Absolutely.
And I think that's one of the things that makes Madhushala so enduring, It's not just a collection of poems about a tavern. It's a guide to living a more meaningful and fulfilling life.
It's a celebration of the human spirit in all its complexity.
And it's a reminder that even in the darkest of times, there's always hope.
And beauty.
And joy.
And that's a message that we can all drink to.
Cheers to that. It's amazing to me how, like, Madhushala was written, decades ago. But, like, it still feels so relevant today.
Yeah. It really speaks to, like, the timelessness of Bachchan's themes.
Yeah.
Like he was writing about, like, social justice and spirituality and, like, search for meaning. And, like, these are all things that people are still grappling with today.
Totally. And it makes me wonder, like, if there is a modern-day Madhushala, Like, is there a place, whether it's, like, a physical space or even just, like, a metaphorical space where people can still come together and, like, share their stories and, like, connect with each other?
I think that's a really interesting question. Like, I think in a way, Madhushala is more of like a state of mind, you know? Like, it's about cultivating this, like, sense of openness and, like, a willingness to connect with others and, like, a curiosity about the world.
I like that.
Yeah.
It's not about finding, like, the actual tavern. It's about
Right.
creating those, like, Madhushala moments in your own life.
Exactly. Like, it could be like, having a deep conversation with a friend or, like, going for a walk in nature or even just, like, sharing a meal with loved ones.
So for our listeners who are, like, really intrigued by Madhushala and want to, like, learn more about Bachchan's work, where would you recommend they start?
Well, I mean, Madhushala is a great place to start, obviously.
Yeah.
But he also wrote, like, a ton of other stuff.
Really?
Yeah, like essays and plays and even, like, autobiographical works.
Yeah.
And, like, all of his writing has this, like, really deep sense of humanity and, like, a commitment to social justice.
So it sounds like we could do, like, a whole other deep dive on just, like, Bachchan's life and work.
Oh, easily. There's so much to explore.
Well, maybe we'll have to do that sometime.
Yeah, that would be fun.
So as we wrap up our deep dive into Madhushala, I think, like, the main takeaway for me is that it's, like, so much more than just like a collection of poems about a tavern.
Mm-hmm.
It's like a reflection on life itself, you know?
Totally. Like, it's an invitation to, like, embrace all of the complexities of the human experience.
Yeah, and to find meaning and connection in like the most unexpected places.
And to, like, never stop questioning and exploring.
Yeah, and to like always be open to new experiences.
Exactly.
So if Madhushala represents life, what kind of wine are you choosing to fill your cup with, listener?
That's a great question.
We hope this deep dive has inspired you to think about that and to maybe create some of your own Madhushala moments in your life.
Cheers to that.
Cheers.